Sometimes the star of a horror movie is someone you never see, someone the characters call on for help, but who never appears on camera, influencing things off-screen, making things happen in the unseen realm. That person is a saint. In this video, we're taking a look at saints who have a starring role in horror movies, and you might be surprised by who comes in at number 1. So grab a snack and a beverage of choice, get comfy, and get ready to meet the top 10 patron saints. Horror Edition. Out of the gate at number 10, Saint Agatha. Saint Agatha. The movie is another evil nuns kidnap and torture innocent young woman and give her permanent religious trauma outing, but the real Saint Agatha was martyred when she was only 15 years old during the persecution of Christians by the Roman Emperor Domitian in the 3rd century AD. Agatha had become a Christian and had taken a private vow of virginity in order to devote herself to prayer. And when she refused an arranged marriage to the Roman governor Quintianus, he sent her to a brothel, hoping that this would horrify her so much that she would cave in and agree to marry him just in order to get out of there. But this didn't work, and Agatha would still not renounce Christ or her vow of virginity. Quintianus then had Agatha tortured and imprisoned, but one night in her prison cell she was visited by the apostle St. Peter, who healed her wounds. She consistently refused to relent to Quintianus' demands, and he kept her in prison, and she died there. She's now revered as a martyr. Catholics seek her intercession for those who suffer from breast cancer due to the nature of the torments that she endured. At number 9, Saint Rita of Cascia. Undertone. In the 2026 horror flick Undertone, the main character, Evie, is taking care of her dying mother. Evie's Catholic mom has tons of Catholic stuff in the house, including a small statue that initially looks like the Virgin Mary, but at one point the statue takes on a deformed demonic appearance, and the movie includes a story about a demon that had once possessed a statue of Saint Rita of Cascia, so it's more likely that the statue represents that saint. The real Saint Rita lived in 14th to 15th century Umbria, which is part of modern-day Italy. Her full name was Margherita, and she was born to a noble family. She wanted to enter a convent at a young age, but as was common practice for noble families at the time, her parents, also, like Saint Agatha, forced her into an arranged marriage. Rita complied, but her husband, Paolo di Mancino, was not a good guy. Saint Rita continually prayed for his conversion, and he showed signs of becoming a better person before a family blood feud led to his murder in the year 1401. Rita publicly forgave her husband's murderers at his funeral and tried to convince her 2 sons to not take revenge. They weren't convinced and showed every sign of doing the exact opposite. Rita prayed that they would be dissuaded from this plan, and they ended up dying of dysentery before they could bring this mortal sin upon their souls and exact revenge for their father's death. Saint Rita eventually was able to make good on the plan that she had had from her youth, and she eventually entered the monastery of Saint Mary Magdalene in Cascia and lived out the rest of her life there, dying in the year 1457. Saint Rita is the patron saint of impossible cases, the other patron of the impossible being the far more famous Saint Jude, and Saint Rita is also the patroness of those in bad marriages. Coming in at number 8, Saint Maud. Saint Maud. The psychological horror Saint Maud follows a fanatically religious and deeply troubled nurse who has a fraught relationship with her patient, and indeed with life and the world in general, since a previous patient of hers died under her care. There actually is a real-life Saint Maud. She's also known as Saint Mathildis or Saint Matilda, and she was a German queen who lived in the 10th century AD. She was brought up in a monastery at Erfurt, where her widowed grandmother, also called Maud, was the abbess. Mathildis did not become a nun, though, and eventually her parents arranged her marriage to a nobleman named Henry, soon to become the Duke of Saxony and later King of Germany. Unlike Saint Rita's husband, Henry was a good guy. Saint Mathildis occupied herself with caring for the elderly, the sick, and the poor, and urging prisoners to repent of their crimes. After King Henry's death in 936, Mathildis founded several monasteries and churches. Unfortunately, there was some strife between Mathildis and her sons in the succession to the throne after Henry's death, but thankfully, they later reconciled. In 7th place, we have Saint Damien, the Omen. So the cute little boy, hellspawn Antichrist Damien in the Omen isn't named after one of the saints called Damien in this movie, and these saints are not invoked in the film, but nevertheless there's an irony in the Antichrist having the same name as some of the greatest saints in history. The Omen's Antichrist might be named Damien because it sounds in English like the word demon, but the name Damien actually has nothing to do with demons at all. It means to tame in Greek. And it was the name of a priest named Damien of Molokai. He was a member of the Fathers of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, and he served the people of a leper colony on the Hawaiian island of Molokai. Father Damien himself died of leprosy, serving his people in the year 1889. Another Damien is the 11th century Benedictine monk, Saint Peter Damien. Like Saints Rita and Maud, he was a nobleman before dedicating himself to the monastic life in the Benedictine order. His dedication to church reform led to his being declared a doctor of the church in the year 1828. St. Peter Damien is the patron of those who suffer from insomnia and other sleep disorders due to his inflicting such severe penances upon himself that they made him become an insomniac. And finally, the Saint Damien who's often associated with another saint named Cosmas. Both of them were Arabian Christians martyred in Syria in the persecution initiated by the Roman Emperor Diocletian in the early 4th century AD. Our number 6 is Saint Christopher. Passenger. Passenger follows van life couple Tyler and Maddie. When they stop to help the victim of a car accident, a traveler demon latches onto them. When this demon tries to strangle Maddie, she grabs a St. Christopher medal that Tyler had hung on the rearview mirror of the van, and she presses the medal to the demon's hand, causing it to release her and vanish. This begins a spiritual battle between the couple and the demon, where St. Christopher's presence continues to play a big part throughout the rest of the movie. Christopher, whose name means bearer of Christ, is the patron saint of travelers. According to legend, he carried the Christ child across a raging river. Christopher was a giant who wanted to serve the most powerful king in the world. When he found a king who he thought fit the bill, he entered the service of that king. But when he saw the king make the sign of the cross at the mention of Satan, Christopher figured that if Satan frightened that king, Satan must be an even more powerful king, so he sought out Satan. Christopher found a bandit who claimed to be Satan and started serving him, but as they were traveling together and passed a roadside cross, the bandit shied away in fear. Christopher reasoned that if Satan was afraid of Christ, then Christ must be the greatest king, so he decided to serve Christ in the end. And this is when we get the famous story of Christopher carrying passengers on his shoulders across a dangerous river. Remember, he was a giant. One day, his passenger was a little child. Christopher figured, easy peasy. But as Christopher carried this child across the river, the child became heavier and heavier until the giant Christopher could barely support him. On arriving safely at the opposite bank, the child revealed himself to be none other than the Christ child himself. Halfway home at number 5, Saint Mary Magdalene, The Devil's Doorway. This 2018 movie out of Ireland and the UK tells the story of two priests in 1960 who investigate a possible miracle involving a statue of the Virgin Mary and a Magdalene laundry. Of course, the good fathers uncover a lot more than they thought they were signing up for, and discover that there is some really sketchy stuff going on in this convent. The movie was inspired by the real-life scandal of the Magdalene laundries in Ireland. These were institutions operated for the most part by orders of Catholic religious sisters to house women of what were known back then as loose morals, including unwed mothers and their children. It was believed that by working in these laundries, these women would atone for their sins through their labor and develop discipline, religious faith, and good character. Unfortunately, based on witness accounts, it didn't always work that way. In 1993, a land development project unearthed 133 unmarked graves holding the remains of 155 women on the former property at the Magdalene Laundry at High Park, Drumcondra, run by the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity. From there, a kind of snowball effect happened, with women coming forward with accusations of serious abuse suffered during their time in these institutions. And the last Magdalene Laundry closed in 1996. Magdalene laundries were named after Saint Mary Magdalene, who, all four Gospels say, was one of the first witnesses to Christ's resurrection. The Gospel of Luke names her as one of the women who accompanied Jesus on his travels and helped out with expenses from their own money. The Gospel of Luke also tells us that Jesus had exorcised Mary Magdalene when she was possessed by 7 demons. And that's everything we know about Mary Magdalene from the Bible. But starting in the 2nd century AD, some of the early church fathers started identifying her as Mary, the sister of Lazarus in the Gospel of John, who anoints Jesus with costly fragrant oil. And they conflated her with the sinful woman, usually interpreted as a prostitute, even though the Gospel doesn't explicitly say that she was, who washed Jesus' feet with her tears and dried them with her hair in Luke chapter 7. The church fathers thought that all of these women were actually the same person, that is, Mary Magdalene. Pope St. Gregory the Great sealed this deal in his Christmas sermon in 591, identifying Magdalene as the sinful woman of Luke 7, and we've been living with it ever since. That's why St. Mary Magdalene is the patron saint of repentant sinners, and why the Magdalene laundries were named after her. The women placed in these laundries were also women of loose morals, like supposedly Mary Magdalene, who it was thought would repent of their sins, also like Mary Magdalene, through working in these laundries. At number 4, Saint Benedict of Nursia. Deliver us from evil, the Pope's exorcist, and a whole bunch of other ones. Benedict created one of the earliest monastic rules. That's a document that outlines the requirements for living in a specific monastic community in the 6th century AD. And that same rule is still being used by the Benedictine order to this very day. But St. Benedict is also a powerhouse of demon busting because of the medal associated with him. It's one of only 2 Catholic saint medals that has its own specific blessing, and that is a blessing of exorcism. The other exorcism medal being that of Saint Anthony of the Desert. And that's why St. Benedict's medal is believed to be uniquely effective against demonic activity, and why we've been seeing more and more of it in horror films made within the past 12 or so years. The medal's inscription translates from the Latin as "Peace, the cross of Holy Father Benedict. May the Holy Cross be my light. May the dragon, that is, the devil, never be my guide. Get behind me, Satan. Never tempt me with your empty things. What you offer me is evil. Drink your own poison." That reference to poison comes from Benedict's own life, when the monks he led as abbot at one point attempted to poison his wine. When Benedict made the sign of the cross over the cup in blessing, it shattered, saving his life. On another occasion, a jealous rival tried to poison Benedict's bread, but a raven flew down and grabbed the bread before Benedict could eat it. Both of these stories are visually represented on the St. Benedict medal, with the saint holding a cup and a raven holding a loaf of bread in its beak. So in addition to fighting demons, St. Benedict is the patron of those suffering from poison. In 3rd place, Saint Michael the Archangel. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The Exorcism of Emily Rose tells the story of the possible demonic possession of 19-year-old Emily, who dies while an exorcism is in progress. The exorcist, Father Richard Moore, is charged with her murder, and when a dark spirit disturbs his sleep, Father Moore recites the St. Michael prayer in his jail cell. It's the longer version of this prayer, which the church permits only priests to say because it has a stronger exorcistic element than the shorter prayer that lay people can pray. The name Michael comes from Hebrew meaning "who is like God." Like his fellow archangel, St. Gabriel, St. Michael appears in the Old Testament's book of Daniel as the angelic protector of Israel. But the famous tradition about St. Michael leading God's angels in battle against the angels who sided with Lucifer in the Great Rebellion against God comes from the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 12 describes a great battle in heaven where Michael and his angels prevail over the dragon, which is Satan, and Satan gets cast out of heaven and thrown down to earth. It's also believed that St. Michael guides the souls of the righteous dead to heaven. The famous St. Michael prayer, which we hear in almost every single exorcism movie, was written by Pope Leo XIII in 1886 in response to his experiencing a mystical vision of demons trying to overthrow the church. But despite what the movies show us, the St. Michael prayer is not actually part of the exorcism ritual, though it can be prayed before or after. Taking us into the home stretch at number 2, Saint Joseph, the Carpenter's Son. The Carpenter's Son might not exactly be a horror movie, but it does have a lot of horror elements. And at the beginning of the film, we find Saint Joseph asking God to help him be strong against the onslaughts of Satan. This reflects one of the Catholic titles of Saint Joseph, Terror of Demons. He's known by this title because Saint Joseph protected the Holy Family, the Virgin Mary, and the child Jesus from both spiritual and earthly enemies. St. Joseph never says a single word in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke where he is mentioned, but his intercession is believed to be very powerful, especially for fathers and laborers. And number 1. Have you guessed who it's going to be yet? A lot of people don't consider her to be a saint because they think of her as being above the saints in a totally separate category. But the Blessed Virgin Mary herself is a saint. Although she is indeed considered to be the queen of saints in those religious traditions, she is also a saint herself. Mary makes a cameo in a boatload of horror movies, but the biggest ones are probably The Exorcism of Emily Rose, The Unholy, and, unfortunately, Immaculate. Of course, the Blessed Virgin Mary is the mother of Jesus Christ. She is named in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke and has an even larger speaking role in the Gospel of John, where she's instrumental in Jesus performing the miracle of turning the water into wine at the wedding at Cana. Although she's not named in John, she's just called the mother of Jesus. Catholic doctrine holds that Mary was conceived without the taint of original sin, so that she would be a purely holy vessel to carry the presence of God within her in the person of Jesus. This is the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. But Catholic exorcists have also said frequently that Mary is a scourge of demons because the demons hate Mary even more than they hate Jesus himself. The reason for this is when Mary consented to be the mother of Christ, she became a participant in humanity's redemption, reversing the curse of sin and death inflicted on the world when the first man and woman turned away from God. Mary's yes to God reversed the effects of Eve's no to God from the book of Genesis chapter 3. Yet Mary is not divine, she's a mere mortal. And Satan can at least understand being defeated by Christ, but being defeated by a mere mortal? He cannot abide that. So Satan absolutely hates the Virgin Mary, and her intercession is always sought in exorcisms. So there they are, the top 10 patron saints, horror edition. Next time you see a horror movie featuring the name of one of these saints, you'll know a little bit more about them. And now you'll be better equipped to tease some of your friends who share one of these saints' names. As always, thank you so much for giving my video some time out of your day. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me for the next one. Until then, take good care. Bye now.